July 4th, 1965, Lexington, Kentucky. Mary Marrs Cawein and her husband, well-known hematologist Dr. Madison Cawein, are out to dinner with friends at Idle Hour Country Club. A fun night was had by all, and the drinks were flowing. But by dawn on July 5th, Mary Marrs was sitting in a chair in her bedroom, dead from a lethal dose of poison. The murder story that follows has been called Kentucky's biggest mystery and its smallest investigation. This is Mary Marrs Cawein, the Fatal Nightcap. Hey, y'all, I'm Chris Calvert.
And I'm her husband, Rob Pottorff. Welcome to Hitch to Homicide.
For better or worse.
Till death do us part.
Welcome back, everybody.
Yes, welcome. And for our friends from Thailand. Yindi Tan Rap.
Well, welcome.
There you go. I don't know how close that was. But...
I thought it was fantastic, sweetheart.
Good.
Wherever you're listening, be sure to hit that subscribe button, then like, rate, and review the podcast so other people who are just like you and can't get enough of true crime can find us.
Yep.
And if you're watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button below.
Please do.
We also have a Buy Me a Coffee link now if you want to send Rob some caffeine. He drinks it all day, every day.
All day, every day.
You can find that link in our show notes. We appreciate all your messages and emails. We do read them all, even if we don't get back to you, I promise.
Yeah.
It is so much appreciated. Thank you for being with us each and every week.
Right.
Well, tomorrow's 4th of July. Tomorrow is Independence Day in the United States. I want to make sure I say the United States because we have lots of people who listen around the world.
Yep.
We got hot dogs, bomb pops.
Hamburgers, frankfurters.
Yes, all of those things. Fireworks.
Ribs.
Dogs who are now afraid.
Pork butt.
And this case actually happened in my hometown of Lexington, Kentucky.
There you go.
Not too far from where I grew up, actually. And it was pretty interesting doing the research in this because every little whip stitch, every little turn I made, I was like, oh, I know where that, really?
I was that close?
Yeah. Well, I wasn't because it was July 1965. I wasn't around yet.
Yeah.
Before we get started, let me thank some sources. The New York Daily News, the Lexington Herald Leader, the Lexington Herald, the Kentucky Post, the Kentucky Colonel, Sports Illustrated, Find a Grave, the Kentucky Attorney General, the Science Classroom Teacher Resource, Wikipedia, the Journal of American Medical Association, the Blood Horse Magazine, the National Library of Medicine, and last but not least, thank you to Jennifer Wakefield, one of our in-laws and outlaws, for suggesting this case.
Thanks, Jennifer.
You will find links to all of those sources and any other citation that we use in our show notes. Not a link to Jennifer. We just want to thank Jennifer.
Yes.
But everything else there will be a link to.
All right. Well, you ready?
I am.
Let's do it.
Mary Marrs Cawein is born on November 29th, 1925 in Danville, Kentucky. Her parents are George Swinebroad and Minerva is her mother's name.
Minerva?
Minerva.
I'm Minervous. Sorry.
Her parents are going to divorce. Mary Marrs' dad owns and operates one of the leading Lexington, Kentucky equine auction companies, Swinebroad Denton.
Okay.
And her father is credited with popularizing much of the selling style now used by equine sales companies.
Oh, really?
So if you've never been to the Keeneland sales or the Fasig-Tipton sales, it's very interesting to watch. They bring the horse out and everybody's sitting there. I used to always be afraid to move because I was afraid, even though I didn't have a paddle, because the people who were bidding, the things that they were doing, it was so subtle. I was like, oh my gosh, if I sneeze, I'm going to buy $1 million horse.
Yeah. And for those that don't know, Keeneland is a racetrack here in Lexington. It's a beautiful, beautiful facility.
It is. But for years, her dad was the lead auctioneer at Fasig-Tipton and at Keeneland. And Mary Marrs's dad, George, in his lifetime, dropped the gavel on the sales of 9 yearlings that went on to become Kentucky Derby winners.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Didn't know that.
Now, Mary Marrs is her name, like Mary Alice or Mary Elizabeth.
Mm-hmm.
She's Mary Marrs. She grows up in Central Kentucky society. I read in one article that she lived the life of a Kentucky belle, working and playing hard. And when she was a teen growing up in Lexington in the 1940s, it was a university and horse town of 40,000 people.
That's it?
That's it.
Wow.
And today, the greater Lexington area has a population of about 350,000 people.
Wow.
Including Rob and me.
And Scotty.
And Scotty. Mary Marrs loved to read. She was a good student at Frankfort High School, where she graduated in 1944. She was a beauty queen and a member of the high school's sorority called the Spinster Club. She lived with her mother after her mom and dad divorced. Her mother would later marry Wesley Vic Perry.
Okay.
Now, Mary Marrs, after she graduates from high school, she attends the University of Kentucky, where she was a Kappa Kappa Gamma. And after graduating college, she goes to work in the animal pathology lab at the University of Kentucky. And this is where she meets Madison Julius Cawein III.
Wow.
We're big on our names down here. I'm just telling you now. Mary Marrs, my roommate in college was Mary Wiss.
Yeah.
And Wiss was her grandfather's name. So it's just really common to do that.
I just got Rob. That's it.
I'm Well, my family calls me Chrissy, but I don't really think I look like maybe I should say this. I don't think I act like a Chrissy. I'm more of a Chris. I'm very to the point.
I call you Chrissy every once in a while.
You do, but my family really does. So Madison was born on September 20th, 1925 in New Jersey, and he graduated from Woodbury Forest High School in Virginia. That's an exclusive boarding school. Mm. He is named for his grandfather, the first Madison Julius Cawein. His grandfather was born in Louisville. The original Madison was a poet known as the Keats of Kentucky.
Oh.
And Teddy Roosevelt was a big fan of Madison Cawein and used to quote his works often.
Wow.
Madison's father, Madison Jr., was an engineer. Now, Madison III went to Harvard and graduated in 1949 before he came to Lexington, Kentucky, where he worked as a graduate assistant in the animal pathology department at the University of Kentucky. And this is where Madison and Mary Marrs meet.
Okay.
Now, these two fall in love and get married in 1950 and promptly move to New Orleans, where Madison has been accepted into medical school at Tulane.
All right.
He graduates in 1954, and these two then move to Minneapolis, Minnesota, where Madison receives a master's in science from the University of Minnesota, and then they move to Rochester, Minnesota, where he was a first fellow and then a first assistant in internal medicine at the Mayo Clinic.
So he just keeps moving up.
He does keep moving up. But I just want to say, back then, you went to medical school and then you did a year with somebody else, and then you're like, hey, I'm a surgeon. Hey, I'm gonna do this. Yeah. I think I'm gonna do that. It's not like it is today where, even family doctors have 4 years of an internship and a residency.
Right.
And then brain surgeons have 9 years, and plastic surgeons have 5 years of regular surgery, and then even more on top of that to do plastics and reconstructive stuff. So it's a little bit different, but he's out pretty fast. Mm-hmm. Now, during all of this, Mary Marrs gives birth to 2 children. First, a boy, Madison Julius Cawein IV. You knew that was coming. I believe they call him Skip. and a daughter, Betsy.
Gotcha.
And when Dr. Cawein is ready to go into private practice, the whole family moves to Lexington, Kentucky. And Mary Marrs stays home to raise the children. And Madison, Dr. Cawein, is deep into private practice in the area of hematology.
Okay.
In 1960, Madison became an associate professor at the University of Kentucky's School of Medicine and on staff at the brand new and newly opened University of Kentucky Medical Center.
Wow.
Which is absolutely huge now.
It takes up half of downtown.
Yeah, absolutely. Over 60 years later.
Wow.
It's huge now. They've bought a house on Chenaway in Lexington. It's a very nice address. We drive down this street all the time.
Yep.
And they joined the Idle Hour Country Club, where Madison would play golf and Madison and Mary Marrs would socialize. Now, a year later, in 1961, a new doctor came to the University of Kentucky in the hematology department. Her name was Dr. Emma J. Lapotte.
Okay.
She went by Pat. And after she arrives, she and Dr. Cawein would make hospital rounds together. He saw her patients and sent his to her. Pat is the same age as Madison and Mary Marrs, but Dr. Lapotte is divorced. And these two, Madison and Pat, they start spending a lot of time together. They worked together to help develop a treatment for Parkinson's disease. They did some groundbreaking research on sickle cell anemia, cloning, and cancer. Dr. Cawein actually solved the long-time mystery of the blue people of Troublesome Creek in eastern Kentucky.
What is that?
Well, a lot of people know about the blue people. I've been asked, when people find out I'm from Kentucky, someone has actually asked me more than once about the blue people. But these people had a genetic blood disorder, and he figured it out and treated them. And if you're not familiar, like Rob, I'm going to give you like a quick story about them.
The Reader's Digest version.
Yes, this is a synopsis.
All right.
And it's about the Fugit family. 6 generations after a French orphan named Martin Fugit settled on the banks of eastern Kentucky's Troublesome Creek with his redheaded American bride. Always got to get the redhead in there. His great-great-great-great-grandson was born in a modern hospital not far from where the creek still runs today. The baby boy inherited a gene from his great-great-great-great-grandfather, Martin, and the gene, it was that he had dark blue skin.
Oh, wow.
They are actually blue. The people are actually blue. They have blue skin. I will post pictures in the In-Laws and Outlaws.
Wow.
Now, the doctors are so astonished by the color of this great-great-great-great-grandson, his name is Benji Stacy, his skin, that they raced him by ambulance from the maternity ward in the hospital near Hazard, Kentucky, to a medical clinic in Lexington.
They probably thought he wasn't breathing.
They did.
Yeah.
2 days of tests produced no explanation for the skin color that looked like it was a bruised plum. That's how dark it is. A transfusion was being prepared when Benji's grandmother speaks up, and she goes up to the doctors and says, "Have you ever heard of the blue Fugits of Troublesome Creek?" Yeah. And the doctors finally come to this conclusion that little Benji's color was due to his genes, a gene inherited from generations back.
So he has blue genes.
He does have a blue gene, but
Thank you. I'll be here all week.
Now, Benji lost his blue tint within a few weeks, and only his lips and fingernails would turn a shade of purple-blue when he got cold or when he got angry. So this really intrigued the medical students after Benji's birth, and they would crowd around this little baby and try to make him cry so he would turn blue.
He's like a human mood ring.
A little bit.
Yeah.
And according to his mom, Benji was, quote, a pretty big item in the hospital, end quote.
Yeah.
It's a recessive gene from 162 years ago. They're known simply as the blue people in Appalachia. And most people who had this disease, they lived to their 80s or 90s. They didn't have any serious illness associated with the blue skin.
Right.
But there, of course, was a stigma attached to it. And that's when Madison Cawein, who was a young hematologist at the University of Kentucky, went into the hills in 1960 to cure the blue people because Martin Fugett's descendants had multiplied their recessive genes all over the Cumberland, all over Appalachia.
Carrying it on.
So Madison would drive back and forth between Lexington and Hazard, which back then was an 8-hour ordeal because there wasn't a main road. It was back roads.
Gotcha.
And then he would scour the hills looking for these blue people that he'd heard these rumors about. I also read that he had to fend off a bunch of dogs, a bunch of porch dogs. But when he found them, he started charting their family trees. And after ruling out heart and lung diseases, he suspected something called methemoglobinemia.
That's easy for you to say.
Methemoglobinemia.
Okay.
Methemoglobinemia.
Let's just call it anemia.
Whatever it is, it's a rare hereditary blood disorder that results from an excess level of methemoglobin, which is blue in the blood. And Madison Cawein drew lots of blood, but he was stumped until he read Dr. E.M. Scott's 1960 report in the Journal of Clinical Investigation. Dr. Scott was a public health service doctor at the Arctic Health Research Center in Anchorage, Alaska.
Wow.
And he had discovered hereditary methemoglobinemia among Alaskan Eskimos and Indians.
You're getting better at that one.
It was caused, Scott speculated, by an absence of an enzyme in their red blood cells, and Dr. Scott also concluded that the condition was inherited as a simple recessive trait. In other words, to get the disorder, one person had to inherit 2 genes for it, one from each parent. And somebody with only one gene would not have the condition, but could pass it down to a child. So this is what happens with Dr. Cawein's blue people. If the condition was inherited as a recessive trait, it would appear often in an inbred line. So just like the Alaskans, their blood had accumulated so much of the blue molecule that it overwhelmed the normal red hemoglobin that shows through as pink in people who are Caucasians.
Gotcha.
So once they figured this out, he actually started giving them 100 milligrams of methylene blue. He was giving them injections of something called methylene blue.
All right.
And then he gave them methylene blue tablets to take as a daily pill. And as soon as they took it, they turned pink.
Really?
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. This all because of Martin Fugett, who was a French orphan who immigrated to Kentucky in 1820 and claimed land on the wilderness banks of Troublesome Creek.
Okay.
Now, everybody seems to think he was blue when he got to Kentucky.
Gotcha.
Now, here's the crazy part. The odds against it were insurmountable, but Martin Fugett managed to find and marry a woman in Kentucky who carried the same recessive gene. I mean, it took that. It's like winning the lottery.
Wow.
Her name was Elizabeth Smith. She was very paled skin, and these two took up housekeeping on the banks of Troublesome and started a family, and from there on out...
Blue people.
Blue people.
Wow.
Yeah, there were 5 families living in this area. They're virtually cut off from the world. So it was pretty normal to marry the girl next door, and that was a little too close to home in the gene pool.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
Is that what happened to the Blue Man Group? Just kidding. Go ahead.
No.
Okay.
Now, today, of course, there aren't any more blue people. I think there are people who still think there are blue people, but there aren't no more blue people since the 1960s.
Gotcha.
And if you didn't know the blue people story, well, now you do.
There it is.
Now you do. And Dr. Madison Cawein was the man who figured it out, and he reversed it.
Okay.
But by 1963... Dr. Cawein and Dr. Lapat, the new hematologist who arrived in 61, they're having a full-blown affair. And this is going to go on for 2 years. That is, until Dr. Madison Cawein gets a little too close with his own patient. You see, Dr. Herschel Lettman, who is a public health service doctor, his wife, Barbara, is diagnosed with leukemia, and Dr. Cawein is her doctor. And then he is her lover.
Oh.
Now, I don't know if he stopped seeing Dr. Lapat, before he started seeing or sleeping with Barbara Lettman, who is 22 years old, by the way.
Wow.
But in October of 1964, a neighbor of Mary Marrs and Madison, her name is Julian Beard, said that Dr. Letman rang her doorbell and asked her to call the police. And he told her he had trailed his wife to the Cawein's home, and he was about to catch his wife and Dr. Cawein together, and he wanted the police to be there.
Wow.
And she calls the police. They show up. They go with Dr. Letman to the front door. They go inside. They stayed 15 minutes with Dr. Letman, who left with his wife, Barbara, in tow. Wow. Now, the neighbor didn't know anything else other than that, but hinky, to say the least.
Yeah, a little bit.
What I do know is that Dr. Pat Lapotte was not happy about it when she found out that he was sleeping with another woman.
You think?
And according to all the information I found, both Barbara Letman and Dr. Lapotte told Mary Marrs themselves about the affairs. She knew.
Wow.
And she had told her father that she was considering a divorce. But I also read that Madison had confronted Mary Marrs, telling her that he wanted a divorce.
Really?
And I also read that when Madison started sleeping with Barbara, Dr. Lapotte was harassing Madison. Dr. Cawein. She's harassing him.
Wow.
She was driving up and down his street looking for him. She's stalking him.
Oh, gosh. For such smart people. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, it gets better. Just hang on.
All right.
But by July 4th, 1965, 59 years ago tomorrow, Mary Marrs and Madison have plans to celebrate Independence Day at Idle Hour Country Club with two of their best friends, the Struthers, okay. Sam Jr. and his wife Betty, who just happened to live down the street from Madison and Mary Marrs.
All right.
Sam Struther Jr. was the secretary-treasurer for the Bluegrass Mortgage Company. And Mary Marrs and Madison's son, Madison IV, who is now 14 years old, has plans of his own for the 4th of July. He's spending the next couple of days with a family friend at a camp on nearby Lake Harrington. Okay. But their daughter, Betsy, who is 9, is going to hang out with the Struthers' 2 children, Elizabeth and Mary, at the Cawein home. And a 69-year-old woman named Phoebe Edwards, who was a maid for some mutual friends, was going to babysit these 3 at the Cawein home.
All right.
Now, it's about 6:15 p.m. on the 4th of July when Sam and Betty drive down Shinaway, the street the Caweins live on, and they stop and pick up Madison and Mary Marrs, which isn't that far from their home because, in fact, it's so close that Elizabeth, their oldest daughter, Sam and Betty's oldest daughter, who was 7, had walked on her own to the Cawein house and was already there when they picked up Mary Marrs and Madison and dropped off the little sister, Mary, who was 5.
All right.
So Sam and Betty's girls are spending the night with Betsy, and then the 4 of them head to the Idle Hour Country Club. Now, these 4 have dinner at the country club. I even read in one account that, Mary Marrs had a salad.
Nice.
But I did read that Mary Marrs was wearing a yellow dress. And while the 4 of them are having dinner, Madison gets a call. Dr. Cawein gets a phone call, and Robert Lewis, the manager at Idle Hour, goes to get him. Way before cell phones, anything like that. You had to call wherever that person was, and they come looking for you.
And fake phone calls are always fun.
It just made me think of, the movies where they have like the really long cord on the phone, and they bring the whole phone to the table. Yep. And I'm just wondering if that's what happened at Idle Hour.
I'm sure it was.
Yeah. But he's, the manager, Robert Lewis, is like, Dr. Cawein, you've got a call. Mm-hmm. And he takes the call, and on the phone is Barbara Letman, the other woman he's having an affair with, his patient, who has leukemia.
Man.
So Madison talks to her briefly, then he hangs up. No one knows what was said that night. Now, later, Barbara will say that she was just worried about her condition and needed reassurance from her doctor, who was also supposedly her lover. Now, if you believe she was calling about her condition that night, I got some land in Appalachia where you can turn blue.
There you go.
That I'll sell you.
There you go.
Now, these 4, Mary Marrs, Madison, Sam, and Betty, they partied hard. Mm-hmm. I read they spent over $40 on drinks that night, which today is the equivalent of dropping about $400
Whoa.
on drinks at the club.
That's a lot of drinks.
And from everything I've read in the newspapers, from that time, they were deep in their cups. They were wasted.
I'm sure. Well, and back then, I mean, I'm sure drinks weren't as expensive as they are now. So $40 if it's $400, that's a lot of alcohol.
Yeah, I mean, one source even said they had like 10 drinks each. How was anybody standing? And I can only imagine it's like bourbon and martinis. I mean, we drink a lot of bourbon here. We really, really do. We like our bourbon.
Yep.
But, I just see the phone at the table and a martini and and they're having a big time at the country club.
Wow.
So these 4 leave the country club between 11 and 11:30 p.m., but they're not finished. Instead of the Struthers dropping off Madison and Mary Marrs and letting the babysitter go, the 4 of them went to the Struthers' home 3 blocks away. But when they arrive, Mary Marrs says that she doesn't feel well and she wants to go home. I read in one newspaper article, this is a good one, quote, "Then, as often happens after a hilarious evening, the visiting wife, Mary Marrs Cawein, complained of feeling tired or sleepy or unwell. She wanted to go home directly. Dr. Cawein insisted on having a nightcap," end quote. As sometimes happens after the hilarity. Yeah.
Hilarious. That's funny.
So here's how this is playing out. They're all drunk. And Mary Marrs is ready to call it a night. But her husband is not, and he says, "I'm staying at Betty and Sam's house for another cocktail." So Sam's like, "Mary Marrs, I'll take you home." And when they arrive, the 2 cars owned by the Caweins, it's an MG sports model and a 1965 Chevelle convertible with its top up, are sitting in their driveway.
Okay.
And when they get there, Sam decides to stay and have a drink with Mary Marrs.
Jeez. Okay.
Now, the telephone records are going to show that a cab company was called to the Cawein home at 12:33 a.m. This is for the babysitter, Phoebe Edwards.
Gotcha.
But Sam accidentally gave the wrong house number. Yeah, because he's wasted.
Yeah. He's lucky you found the front door.
And he had to call the cab company back at 12:53. Now, Phoebe takes the cab that arrives and finally makes it home. She will say she remembers walking in the door and seeing that it's 2 a.m. Now, she's later going to say that Mary Marrs didn't seem drunk to her at all and that she was talking to Sam about their new house. So it seems like Mary Marrs and Madison were planning on buying a new home. Don't know if that's something you do when you're planning on divorcing your spouse or not.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem like it would be.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
Meanwhile, back at the Struther house, Madison, Dr. Cawein, is still drinking. Now, I don't know if Betty, Sam's wife, was still throwing him back or not, but Madison's wasted, and he's going to stay the night. He's 3 blocks away. A 7-year-old walked from that house to their house earlier that night.
Yeah.
And he's going to stay the night. And apparently this has happened before.
Okay.
3 blocks from home.
All right.
At the Cawein home, Sam goes to Mary Marrs and Madison's bedroom. They're going to have a nightcap in there.
What?
Well, I also read that the bedroom was the only room that had air conditioning at that time.
Okay.
I even read that the girls were sleeping upstairs. Remember, Phoebe's left. The babysitter's left.
Right.
Mary Marrs is there with Sam. And the girls are upstairs, and Phoebe had talked about the fact that the air conditioning wasn't working upstairs, and she had to raise the windows.
Gotcha.
And it's July in Kentucky.
Yeah.
That's hot and humid.
HAWT.
Hot.
Yep.
So I think that's why they went to the bedroom, because it was air conditioned.
All right.
Mary Marrs has a bourbon and water, and Sam has 1 or 2 beers. He can't remember, and then he drove home.
Oh, jeez. Smart move.
When he arrives back at the house, his wife asked him, quote, "What took so long?" end quote. Now, I also read in the newspaper, it was a good-natured, "What took so long?" It wasn't like she was mad. Like, what took you so long?
Like she knew.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what listen, nobody knows what these people knew. Sam and Betty and Madison sit up another hour talking until 3 a.m. And then Madison went to sleep or passed out in one of the girls' bedrooms. Because remember, their girls are sleeping at his house with his wife.
Right.
15 minutes later, George Farrell at 3:15 a.m., a carrier boy for the Lexington Leader, was in front of the Cawein home delivering the combined holiday editions of the Lexington Leader and the Lexington Herald. Okay. Now, today they're the exact same paper. It's the Lexington Herald Leader.
Right.
Like so many papers, how they merged.
Sure.
The paper boy sees that the lights are on the first floor.
All right.
And he sees not 2 cars in the driveway, but 3. Now, Sam's left.
Yeah.
It was a light-colored American-made car. It was parked behind the Cawein's 2 cars. And this paperboy remembers this because it was blocking the sidewalk and he had to go into the street to keep walking.
Okay.
The next morning, Betty is the first one up at her house. She calls over to the Cawein home. Remember, that's where the kids were for the night.
Sure.
And the kids answer the phone and say that they hadn't eaten breakfast yet, because Mary Marrs hadn't come out of her bedroom. So Betty tells them, don't wake her up. She didn't feel well last night. And she's probably thinking, she's got to have a hangover because they're either still drunk or they have hangovers. No way it's either one. It's one of those two.
Right.
So Sam, her husband, drives over. He picks up the children. He pulls into the driveway and he honks the horn. And the children come running out. And when Sam leaves, Madison Cawein is still asleep in one of the girls' rooms at his house.
Okay.
And Betty is making breakfast for the kids. Now, after Betty feeds the kids, she drove them all to a neighbor's pool for a swimming lesson. And on her way home, she stopped at the Cawein house to check in on Mary Marrs. Now, a newspaper article said that Betty wanted to see, quote, how she was feeling and to chuckle over the happenings of the night before, end quote. I don't know how funny it was.
Yeah.
The front door is open. Nothing new here. It's unlocked. They leave the door unlocked all the time.
Sure.
Every single day. They just leave the door unlocked.
It's the 60s.
She calls out for Mary Marrs, and she's just met with silence. So when Betty walks into Mary Marrs' bedroom, she finds her still in her yellow dress, but she's missing her panties. She's seated in a bedside chair like she'd fallen asleep. Her head was slumped to one side. There was a book nearby, but Mary Marrs wasn't asleep. She was dead. Betty calls her husband and Dr. Cawein to come to the house. She calls Madison, get over here.
Right.
And from this point forward, there is so much confusion about what transpired and in what order. So I'm going to do the best I can with the information that's out there.
Okay.
There's even some confusion on who went into the bedroom first or who did what after Sam and Madison arrive, after Dr. Cawein arrives.
Right.
But everybody agrees that Dr. Madison Cawein walked in, he was shocked, and he declared, quote, it's a heart attack, end quote. Then immediately, Madison hands Sam the glass of bourbon by the chair and tells him to pour it out. And Sam does.
Why? Yeah.
They all agreed that the scene was peaceful. It didn't look like there'd been a struggle in the bedroom. There was no sign of robbery. There also was no suicide note. The first person Dr. Cawein calls, the first person Madison calls, who do you think?
Oh, wouldn't you call the police?
He called Dr. Thornton Scott, a family friend. But Dr. Scott didn't pick up the phone. And I read that Dr. Scott lived nearby. Next, they called
the police?
Dr. William Winternitz, a member of the medical staff at the University of Kentucky. He also lives nearby.
All right.
At 10:30 that morning, Dr. Winternitz pronounced Mary Marrs dead. But because he could see a spot of blood on her slip and on the arm of the chair where Mary Marrs is sitting, he examined her body, and he finds marks made recently on her left and right thigh. Dr. Winternitz thinks it's a suicide, and he starts looking around the area for a hypodermic needle, because that's what those marks are. But there wasn't one. So Dr. Winternitz looked for a glass from which Mary Marrs might have taken a drink.
But they emptied that.
There wasn't one.
Wow.
And we know that because Madison had Sam toss it out.
Right.
Dr. Winternitz looks at the bed, which he's later going to describe as having been made so carefully, quote, you could bounce a quarter off of it, end quote. He searches the room for about 15 minutes, and then he suggests that an autopsy should be performed. And Dr. Cawein, Madison, he agrees, but by the time they called the police, the scene was tainted. They'd touched the body, and they had destroyed evidence.
Yeah, right.
Now, the body is sent to the University of Kentucky Medical Center, and Dr. Winternitz notified the Fayette County coroner, Chester Hager, of the death and said that he, meaning Dr. Winternitz, would sign the death certificate because he's the one who pronounced her dead.
Right.
Now, they find her body at 10:30 a.m., and they start the autopsy at 1:45 that afternoon. Dr. Wilmer Talbert, a pathologist at the Kentucky Medical Center, starts the autopsy. And 15 minutes later, at 2 p.m., Dr. Winternitz calls Chester Hager, the coroner, again to say that Mary Marrs's autopsy wasn't complete, and he was actually getting ready to leave to go on vacation. So it would be up to Chester Hager to sign the death certificate.
Okay.
And before he leaves for vacation, Dr. Talbert tells Chester Hager, who is an embalmer and not a doctor, that there is, quote, a possibility of poisoning, end quote.
Whoa.
That night, friends of the Caweins, the Knuckles, are at the Cawein home consoling Madison when the phone rings and Alfred Knuckles answers. These are people who own horses.
Okay.
The voice on the other end was, according to one source, quote, neutral. It could have been a man or a woman's, end quote. But it said, quote, Mary Marrs is dead, end quote. And then they hung up.
What?
Then the phone rang again, and Alfred Knuckles answers once more. And there's another person on the end again, and this time they're chuckling.
Whoa.
And then they hung up.
Whoa.
Now, at this point, not many people knew about Mary Marrs's death. It wasn't until the next day, July 6th, that the radio or the newspaper published anything. And Madison is telling people that she just died suddenly. And many thought she had died of cancer because of this really small death notice in the newspaper that said, quote, the family prefers memorials be in the form of contributions to the American Cancer Society, end quote. On July 7th, Dr. Talbert notifies Chester Hager of the autopsy results, the toxicology results,
right,
and tells him that Mary Marrs Cawein had died of poisoning, carbolic acid diluted with alcohol. Now, carbolic acid or phenol is a sweet-smelling, clear liquid, and it can be found in adhesive dyes, perfumes, textiles, various antiseptics, disinfectants, and germicides.
Okay.
It's one of the oldest antiseptic agents.
Gotcha.
Now, in 1900, Dr. Herman Klein wrote an article for the Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA. And what he says is that to treat carbolic acid poisoning with alcohol administered orally, 4 ounces every half hour until 3 doses are taken, and then 1 ounce every hour for 4 hours. So if you just drank carbolic acid, it would burn the inside of your mouth. It would burn your esophagus all the way down to your stomach.
Okay.
But carbolic acid in an alcoholic drink, if there's enough of it in the alcohol, will kill you. It tastes sweet. You don't taste it. And because it's mixed with alcohol, it doesn't burn your mouth or the esophagus going down. And that's what Dr. Talbert actually says.
Wow.
Now, the day after the autopsy results come back, July 8th, they bury Mary Marrs. And after the funeral, the coroner, Chester Hager, only then reports the death as a coroner's case to the Lexington police. What?
Why would he wait so long?
Why would he?
Okay.
Maybe he was asked to.
Yeah.
Chester calls Gilbert Cravens, the police captain in charge of the homicide division. Now, Mary Marrs is buried, and only immediate relatives and close friends attend this funeral. And when she's in the ground in Lancaster Cemetery, just east of Danville, Kentucky, where she grew up, the police are notified of foul play, but not before.
Wow.
Now, remember, Dr. Winternitz is on vacation, but he said from his examination that Mary Marrs had been dead 4 to 8 hours when he saw her. So she died sometime after 2 a.m. on July 5th.
Okay.
About a half hour after Sam got home to his wife. Remember, she says he's home at 1:30.
Yeah.
The hypodermic needle marks on Mary Marrs were on the outside left thigh, just below the buttocks, and on the right thigh. There were two spots that could have been difficult for Mary Marrs to reach herself, but not impossible.
Right.
But where are the needles? So if she did this to herself, why wouldn't the needle be there in the room, right?
Yeah. And why would she do it to herself?
Exactly.
Okay.
But it's never known, or at least it's never released, what was actually injected into Mary Marrs. The only thing in the report was that around the injection areas, there were traces of methylparaben, an antiseptic for hypodermic needles. And remember, back then, they sterilized and reused needles.
Yeah.
I know this for a fact because my late mother was a lab technician and a phlebotomist in the early 60s, and she would always talk about the fact that she had to sharpen her own needles.
Jeez.
Isn't that crazy?
It's scary.
So the police are thinking, based on the areas where she's shot up with something, that she was face down on the bed, injected, and then moved to the chair, which is why there was blood on the chair and on her slip.
Right.
Then the person who moved her there gave her the bourbon laced with carbolic acid, which killed her. There was no evidence of burning in her throat or mouth, no evidence of vomiting or convulsions or a struggle of any kind. But that's because her cocktail had alcohol in it.
Right.
And that's what the pathologist told the police, that it wouldn't burn or anything going down. But once it hit the bloodstream, the phenol would turn volatile, burning the stomach and killing Mary Marrs in about 20 minutes after she drank it.
Wow.
So did they put her to sleep so she didn't suffer?
Yeah. Sounds like it.
Now, something else from the autopsy report was that Mary Marrs was dangerously drunk, too. Well, we kind of knew that about all of them, right?
Yeah.
Like she was close to alcohol poisoning. But the babysitter will say that Mary Marrs seemed perfectly fine and not drunk at all when she came home and let her go. So maybe she's just really good at hiding it.
Right.
I am not good at hiding it, which is why I would never drink and drive for more than one reason. Because if I ever rolled down the window and they said, "If you had something to drink," I'd be like, "I had a sip of a margarita." Even if I just had a sniff of it, I would have to tell the truth.
Yep.
Then on July 10th, after they bury Mary Marrs and after her funeral and after Dr. Madison Cawein knows his wife was poisoned, he's overheard by a police officer while on the telephone with Mary Marrs' mother, telling her that the pathologist told him that she probably took too many Alka-Seltzers and gas built up in her system and it caused her to have a heart attack. Lies, Dr. Cawein, lies.
Yeah.
So he's sticking to his heart attack story.
Sure.
When police and Chester Hager question Dr. Madison Cawein, he tells them that he and his wife were good friends and that she had no known enemies. He also tells police that they would always leave their house unlocked and that he kept no needles or medicine in the house. But they tell him she died of carbolic acid poisoning. And he says, well, that's not true. She wouldn't commit suicide. And they're like, dude, we never said she committed suicide.
Yeah.
We said she died of poisoning.
Right.
Police will say they questioned too many people to count. That was a quote. Quote, too many people to count. But their investigation to this day is shrouded in secrecy 59 years later.
Jeez.
In the month that followed, few people knew that an autopsy was even ordered, and even fewer knew that she had died of carbolic acid poisoning. After a month of the rumor mill flying, the police chief, E.C. Hale, makes a statement saying, and I quote, a thorough general investigation of the Cawein case is in effect, and the efforts of the police department are beginning to bear fruit in clearing up several angles of the case, and recent developments have caused an interstate investigation in investigating certain leads which might prove valuable in the case. End quote.
Blah, 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 blah.
And the paper printed that with a headline that said, what'd he say?
Jeez.
And then ended the article with, he did not elaborate.
Yeah.
It was one of the best newspaper articles I've ever seen from that time.
That's funny.
What'd he say? That was great. Meanwhile, Madison Cawein isn't talking, and he had hired himself a criminal lawyer named John Y. Brown, a man who would go on to marry Miss America Phyllis George and become the governor of Kentucky.
Oh, yeah, right.
John Y., as he's known affectionately in Kentucky, he's dead now, but he would not allow Madison near reporters. And when the media asks the police about it, well, Chief Hale said, quote, "A lot of people have hired lawyers. We're dealing with doctors, MDs, PhDs, people with college degrees. These are smart people," end quote. So basically, no one is talking, and their attorneys are stymieing the police's questions because they're all refusing to talk without their attorney, and their attorneys are telling them not to talk.
Sure.
And the media is angry because police normally only withhold information that would tip off a killer or hurt their investigation. But the police aren't talking either.
Right.
But eventually, the police, under pressure, they admit that their search for clues was hampered because the bedroom was cleaned before they got there.
Really?
What police would say was that they believed the injections were definitely administered a short time before Mary Marrs died, and that the police had not questioned the 3 little girls who were asleep upstairs to see if they had seen or heard anything.
Right.
Finally, a police report is filed. It was a, quote, personal injury report, end quote. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it contained the details I've already given you,
right,
except for the affairs that Dr. Cawein is having. But it does list the carbolic acid as the primary cause of death and that she did have a lot of alcohol in her system, but they couldn't rule out the mysterious injections as part of the death either.
Right.
Then Lexington Police Chief E.C. Hale ordered his entire 27-man detective squad. I'm sure all of our LAPD guys out there who listen are like, a 27-man detective squad. All 27 men to find the killer of Mary Marrs. He's sending them out. And the men said that their vacations and days off were all canceled because they had to go find this killer.
All right.
But 2 days after saying this, the police chief took off on a 3-week vacation to Charlotte, North Carolina.
Wow.
Part of which I understand was a nationwide meeting of police chiefs for training or something like that, but not all 3 weeks.
Right.
On August 6th, 1965, a group of horsemen in Lexington put together a reward for anybody who provided information leading to an arrest and conviction. They called it the Swinebroad Reward. It was $5,000. On August 8th, Madison Cawein took his 2 children on a Caribbean cruise. And on August 11th, police were looking into the cars parked outside the night of the murder. But the car was one that looked a lot like any other car. And little George Farrell Jr., the paper boy, they were like, did it look like this? Did it look like this? Did it look like this? And he's like, it was the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now, there's also going to be another neighbor who says that at some point in the morning, a car was parked in front of the Cawein's home on the street. But nobody was supposed to go over there, remember?
Right.
On August 13th, Chester Hager called an 11:30 a.m. press conference saying that Mary Marrs Cawein died of unnatural causes and not by her own hand. They asked the community for their help. If you've got any information, let us know. And a neighbor of Mary Marrs did.
Uh-oh.
She said a year before Mary Marrs died, there was a fight in their home.
Oh.
A blonde woman walked up to the front of the Cawein home at about 2 a.m. She was medium build and wearing slacks. She stayed a short time on the front porch and then left, but then she turned around and went right back inside the house. And there was a lot of yelling and screaming, and the neighbor could see 2 women through the open front door pushing and shoving each other.
Really? Wow.
It's a fight.
Yeah. Cat fight.
And according to this neighbor, it lasted a good long while. She said it lasted 30 minutes, like between shouting and shoving.
Wow.
And then the woman just left.
Did she have any idea who the woman was, or did she have a description? Or
No, just that she was medium build, blonde,
Wow.
wore slacks.
Okay.
So was that Dr. Pat LaPlante?
That was my question, yeah.
Was it Barbara Letman, Madison's patient?
Or a myriad of other women that he plowed through. Jeez.
The logical question here is, where was Madison's angry mistress, Dr. Pat LaPlante, on the 4th of July?
Right.
She said that she had dined with an elderly widower and was at her own home at 9:30 where she, quote, slept well all night, end quote. So no witnesses to her account after 9:30 p.m. that night.
Right.
And we know that Barbara called during the 4th of July dinner at the Idle Hour Country Club. What did she really want to talk to Madison about? Now, by the end of August, Dr. Cawein and his 2 children were home from vacation. The following Monday, he was back at work at the University of Kentucky Medical Center. But quietly in the background, the police were using a polygraph test to test people who were close to the case.
Okay.
This is all very hush-hush, apparently.
All right.
But on Wednesday, September 8th, Madison took a test in Frankfort, Kentucky, which is our state capital, with the state police because they had the good polygraph machine and not the lie detector box that the Lexington police had. They
Right.
just called it a lie detector box.
It had like 2 probes and a spring.
I don't know what it had. A little old lady going,
Yeah.
he's lying. He's a lying sack of shit.
I don't believe him.
The results from Dr. Cawein's polygraph, what do you think?
Negative?
They were inconclusive.
Okay.
And John Y. Brown, his attorney, was madder than a wet hen when he found out that the results were leaked because apparently they had a deal going into the test with the state police force. Nothing was going to be said,
Right.
regardless of what the outcome was.
Sure.
But finally, a grand jury is set to hear this case.
Wow.
September 22nd, 1965, Circuit Judge Bradley is presiding over the grand jury in Lexington, Kentucky. Madison gives testimony. And then right after he leaves and Dr. Pat LaPlante walks in,
Right.
she gives her testimony and leaves. But when she does, reporters are following her. So remember, grand jury closed.
Right.
Nope, nobody knows what goes on in there, right?
Sure. Yeah.
When she walks out, the reporters are following her, and leading the pack is a kid from the University of Kentucky Colonel. That's the school university newspaper, the Kentucky Colonel.
Right.
He's a reporter photographer. Of course he is, because when you reported, you had to take your own pictures.
Right.
He follows her, and without warning, Dr. LaPlante turns around and grabs the camera that is around his neck and starts yelling at him, saying, quote, "You've been having your fun. Now I'm going to have some of my own," end quote.
Whoa.
And these two are in a huge kerfuffle,
Wow.
like a physical fight.
Yeah.
And there to take photographs of it all unfolding is the Lexington leader photographer named Phil Pointer Jr. And this goes on for apparently like 3 or 4 minutes.
Jeez.
Until Dr. LaPlante releases her grip and she walks away and she hops into her car and she drives off. She speeds off.
Okay.
Minutes later, she's on the phone to Bill Samuels at the Public Information Office of UK Medical Center to get the story and the photographs pulled from the Kentucky Colonel.
I don't think that's going to happen.
It never happened. And not only was it in the Kentucky Colonel, it was in the Lexington Herald Leader.
Yeah.
Now, the grand jury wants to speak with Barbara Letman, but they can't because her leukemia is back and she is now in the hospital. But her husband comes in to testify, and with him, he has his work records. I actually read in the newspaper that they were like, "Are you ready?" And he like tapped his jacket pocket. Like, I've got my stuff. I can show that it wasn't me.
Right.
So he's got his work records, exactly when he's working and where he is on the 4th of July.
Right.
It's his alibi. But after all is said and done, there was a 7-page report that said, and I'm paraphrasing, that the coroner, Chester Hager, and the Lexington police had diligently investigated the death. So 18 witnesses, 12 hours, and the murder of Mary Marrs was still unsolved. No charges were brought.
Jeez.
Now, any of the three doctors, Madison Cawein, the husband, Dr. Emma Pat LaPlante, and Herschel Lettman, whose wife Madison was screwing,
right.
All three had motive. But who could say who the killer is?
Yeah.
So Dr. Lettman's boss comes forward. He shows he's working the night of the July 4th. He couldn't have done it.
Right.
Madison Cawein is drinking or passed out at the neighbor's house. He couldn't have done it.
Right.
But Dr. LaPlante said she'd had dinner with a widower and then she went home. But doesn't that kerfuffle with the little guy from the Kentucky Colonel sound a lot like the kerfuffle at the front door?
Yeah, exactly.
With Mary Marrs?
Right.
After things settled down, Dr. Cawein sold his house on Chinaway, saying that he'd been offered a job in New York. And at the same time, Dr. LaPlante went to Switzerland to study, but she was back the following fall at the medical center before she moved to California. Now, the investigation went cold and into a very dark closet for decades because tomorrow is the 59th anniversary.
Wow.
The witnesses are all gone, including Dr. Madison Cawein, who died of cancer in 1985. But these investigation files have never been released.
Really?
An author wanted the police records, but they wouldn't give them to her, citing that it was an ongoing case.
After 59 years, it's still an ongoing. Okay.
In 2009, the Lexington Police Force Lieutenant James Curlis, he took an interest in this case after he discovered that Dr. LaPlante was still living in California. She was 83 years old.
Oh, wow.
She practiced medicine for 69 years.
Man.
You know what that means? You know what the key to longevity is?
What?
Not having a husband.
Don't say that.
No, married people live longer.
Yeah, okay.
But this Lieutenant Curlis, he finds her at her home near Los Angeles in La Miranda, California. She has spent her career there as a leukemia specialist, but she wasn't happy to see him. She's in her garage. He sort of pulls up. He tells her who he is. Mm-hmm. And, quote, after a few terse replies, according to Curlis, Dr. LaPlante stated that she was appalled that we were there wasting tax money and cannot understand why we were here asking her questions, end quote. And then she closed the garage door.
Oh, man.
I see her standing there and the garage door is just going down. She's just staring at him.
Yeah, thou doth protest a bit too much.
Dr. LaPlante died in 2010. She was 84 years old.
Wow.
The case is still a mystery, and more importantly, the case remains an open, cold case file. So anybody who's tried to see the case files or any photos, like people have asked just for photos,
right?
Which police say there are none. No photos.
What?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
People have accused the Lexington-Fayette County urban government of violating the Open Records Act, but they've said that because of sufficient proof of harm resulting from disclosure of the requested records, the case is, quote, still an open status and no arrest has been made.
Nothing to see here. Move along.
So they're saying a case is considered closed when it is cleared. And this case, 59 years old, tomorrow, has not been cleared.
Wow.
So still today, we have no idea what happened to Mary Marrs Cawein.
And I know you hate these kind of cases.
I hate these kind of cases.
Yeah.
But that is the mysterious murder of Mary Marrs, and that's all I have to say about that. She is only one, but what if one is all that's needed? Hospice nurse Indy Luce has fallen in love. After caring for billionaire Louis Thornberry until his final breath, she's now engaged to marry the heir apparent of the global tech empire, David Thornberry. But as the divinely marked Indy packs up her old life to begin anew, a sacred promise comes back to haunt her with a vengeance. As an unrelenting spiritual battle unfolds in the shadows, the descendants of those like Indy find themselves persistently lured and ensnared as a relentless surge of evil becomes an unstoppable force. With malevolent entities following her every step, what Indy doesn't know about her family's sacred covenant could tip the scales of good and evil. the follow-up to the paranormal suspense novel Lead Me from Temptation and Book 2 of the Divine Darkness series, Deliver Me from Evil, is now available March 29th, 2024, wherever you buy or download books, or go to chriscalvert.com. If evil prowls seeking someone to devour, can one woman seek and save that which is lost?
Wow, 59 years. That's insane that they won't release any information on this.
Nope.
And is anyone actively trying to figure out? Yeah.
No. I mean, listen, all these people who are associated with this case, they died long ago.
Right. But
there is something in this case that they have never wanted out.
Right.
And I don't know if it has something to do with Mary Marrs's husband, because he was a very well-respected hematologist.
Sure.
I mean, who knows?
Right. Well, I mean, they were socialites, so.
Yes, and it was 1965, right. So you never wanted to talk about anything bad going on.
Right.
And maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was something so minute that today we would look at it and be like,
really?
What's the big deal?
Yeah.
And back then it was a huge deal.
Right.
But there are a lot of people who are kind of like, money buys silence.
Yeah.
So if you've got money and power, you can make sure that anything gets squelched. Yeah. And that's kind of what happened.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about people that don't have money and are stupid and get caught with a little bless your heart. All right. This first one I'm calling number 1, don't trust your gut.
I never do. No, I always trust my gut.
Well, this guy didn't. A nearly 300-pound Tennessee man who pleaded guilty to multiple counts of rape, kidnapping, and robbery is trying to overturn his conviction by accusing the interrogators of using junk food to coerce a confession.
Here's a whopper.
Bruce Tuck, that's his name. Fitting. The so-called big-bellied rapist said jailers softened him up by feeding him only lettuce.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, Tuck said the detective then came in and offered him a bag of chips and cold drink in exchange for talking about the case. Tuck confessed to 19 felony charges.
Oh, my gosh.
That led to a 60-year sentence.
All for a bag of Munchos.
That's it. Tuck's public defender said he didn't know what Tuck ate in jail.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, good Lord.
I know.
Well, I'm glad he was convicted.
Yeah, exactly.
What did they call him? The big belly rapist?
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh. Okay.
Okay, number 2, I'm calling Up Periscope.
Okay.
A 42-year-old Delaware man was charged after twice stripping off his swim trunks at his apartment's pool.
Cannonball.
Police said a 17-year-old female lifeguard saw that Dean Reisler was swimming naked in the pool and told him to put his swim trunks back on.
Hey, you, put your pants back on.
Reisler complied. But about 5 minutes later, the lifeguard noticed that Reisler had ripped off his trunks again and was raising his legs and floating on his back.
Raising his legs and floating on his back?
Yep. Police were called and Reisler was taken into custody. Once again, Up Periscope.
I get it now.
There you go.
Okay. But I hope that pool was heated.
Oh, man. Just a little shrinkage. Little Seinfeld reference there. All right, number 3, and finally, would you like that in 1s or 5s?
5s, please.
An Indiana man was arrested after he went through the drive-through window and tried to cash a check for $1 million.
At the bank?
Police said the teller kept the check and made a copy of the suspect's driver's license before the man left. Police arrested Justin Johnson, 21, at his home and charged him with forgery.
Oh, my gosh.
No surprise. Police said Johnson was given a blank check by a man for who he had done some work for. I don't know why anybody would give anyone a blank check, but he had it, and he tried to cash it for $1 million.
He signed the check and then handed it to the guy?
Handed it to the teller, said, I'd like $1 million.
No, I mean the guy who had the checking account. Did he sign it, or you just give him a blank check without his signature?
I think you just gave him a blank check. I know.
You get what you deserve.
Yep. I'm going to do a little Austin Powers. $1 million. There you go. So that's your bless your hearts for this week.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
I still like that it shrinks like a frightened turtle.
Yep. Up Periscope. Okay.
That was good.
Okay.
Well, if you have a bless your heart or you know somebody's heart who needs blessing, I'm not going to reference the up Periscope. All you have to do is go to Hitch to Homicide. When you get there, there's a pull-down menu, and while you're there, you can also suggest a case, just like this one was suggested today.
Yep.
And you can also tell us your own true crime story.
There you go.
That's my amazing, funny husband out there.
That's my beautiful bride in the booth.
Join us next time on Hitch to Homicide.
Bye, y'all.